I'll talk just to introduce the context. The section we're now starting for this week is on entrepreneurial mayors. In a sense, if one pole of the course is globalization, which is covering the world with huge problems that seem hugely intractable. No single person, no mayor seems able to do anything. Imagine you're mayor of Wuhan today. What would you do? And if you're president of China, what do you do, etc. That's one perspective. But we were conquered by Genghis Khan, there's nothing we can do about it. Versus, how can you, as one mayor, one citizen, one person, make a difference? And I worked a lot with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and publicly, you could have 50 mayors come to Washington, and they'd visit their congressmen, their senators, and they'd have a press conference on the Hill, and they'd say, the cities are going to burn, we need more money. And then the staffs of the U.S. Congress would say, when they developed a staff with PhDs, would say, what's your evidence that burning would make any difference? And so the Conference of Mayors started going to people like me to say, no, well, we can't develop a real R&D for the mayors. Nobody will believe it. So we've got to go to the top universities. So we started having conferences. And so I got involved in that way, meeting with the mayors. And so, but the mayors publicly would say that, give us money. Privately, you'd have 20 mayors talking to one another. And if one mayor says, I can't solve that, that's too big. And the 19 mayors would say, if you say that, you don't deserve to be mayor. So mayors publicly and privately can have a more entrepreneurial or a we can do nothing discourse, using that French word, and they're both true in part. Examples. LA is the most problematic city in the U.S. in the sense of huge traffic, lousy public transit, expansion with lots of suburbanization, no real central city with high central neighborhood with high density buildings for solving these kinds of issues. Huge dependence on the car with these environmental problems, traffic getting worse and worse. A regular event on the television is people shooting each other on the freeways because of resentment, over freeway battles, and then having them one race away, and then having a police helicopter try to follow the person over 100 miles an hour. I mean, that happens all the time in LA. Okay. You do surveys of citizens across the U.S. in the metro areas and say, how much are you unhappy with your neighborhood or your city, and what LA is the worst? Okay, why? Well, one is why, and it's complicated, but what are some solutions? And the main solution to this, which was tried out in a couple of years after the San Fernando Valley and Hollywood both threatened to secede, and everyone was criticizing. So they said, we need what we covered in last week, which was Tocqueville. They said, if we don't have trust, we don't have legitimacy, we have conflict, we must need more participation, because Tocqueville says that's where legitimacy and trust come from. And most people in Latin America even say the same thing. Many of the smart Colombian and Mexican experts. John Sudarsky is a national Colombian senator, has a lead book on this, Harvard PhD, very smart guy, and we've argued. Okay. They tried the New England solution by creating 80, 90 little neighborhoods within the LA area. And so they were given more autonomy because they have big, big districts, and the city council members are distant from their citizens. So the Tocquevillian answer is, let's create little city halls. People will come and talk. Tocqueville said, we think that ought to solve the problem. So they tried it, and it worked fine in Santa Monica and places with highly educated and high-income people. And it was a disaster in the low-income Mexican and black areas where they needed the help. So what do? Most of them, so I've been to many conferences with people from LA on these issues, and they said, let's do what we learned at Berkeley in grad school or Harvard, when they said use Tocqueville, and I said no, it's failing. That's what we said in the book called Can Tocqueville Carry? Tocqueville didn't work in Asia. Tocqueville doesn't work in Los Angeles. It's not that Tocqueville is wrong, it's that Tocqueville is partially supported in some context. And what can we do? Let's go and look at different contexts, different scenes around the world. And for Los Angeles, let's look south of the border. Instead of saying the problem is the Mexicans, let's say what are the solutions that the Mexicans and the Colombians and the Brazilians have found in their own countries that may be working in a more Latin context that we are not sensitive enough to because we're assuming a more New England context. That's the problem with Putnam. So Putnam, in the book we discussed, contrasts northern and southern Italy. That's a strong step in the right direction. But he ignored those northern and southern Italian differences when he wrote Bowling Alone. He just said America and the world needs participation. And if we don't have organized groups, we'll lose our legitimacy. So my suggestion was to look south of the border, and one huge example we found was Bogota. And we have a madam right here. Why don't you wave your hand? She's from
Bogota.
Bogota. All right. Bogota has had some of the most brilliant mayors in the world in the last 20, 30 years. Led initially, and this is some of the pictures, and that's what I'm framing this in this context. The first was Mockus, M-O-C-K-U-S, then his colleague Peñalosa, then Mockus again. Mockus then ran for president of Colombia and got 40% of support in the polls, but he still lost. He was a brilliant innovator. How? There's a book by Eleonora Pazzotti on rebranding shows how Chicago, Naples, and Bogota all had reputations as gangsters, drugs, crime, murder, corruption, and they all changed dramatically with new entrepreneurial mayors, all three cities. And they did some of the same things, but some things that they can help each other with. If we see that we've got a huge problematic legacy to overcome, and they're not the only country, they're not the only cities in the world with these problems, but the fact that they've had such successful mayors suggests it's worthwhile looking at them more closely. For local lessons and for national lessons. So we held conferences. We started with the locals. Then people came to our conferences from the French and the German socialist parties. They saw how we were doing some of these things, and we then had heavily funded and sponsored conferences with the French Socialist Party. We had 300 people in outside Paris. When the French Socialist Party, led by Mitterrand at that time, François Mitterrand, was saying, how much should we follow Marx, and how much should we say the proletariat is the future? And as you've heard me say before, blue-collar workers have dropped in size by half. Half of the workforce in France and Germany and England and the U.S. has gone. They've been replaced by iPhones and other things like that. And so what do you do politically if you're the head of a socialist party or the communist party, and these were your voters? You lose half your voters. What do you do? So the French basically said we need to change. And so we had conferences here in Germany, Paris, and so forth. and they won elections. They both changed policies and won by exploring more innovative policies, especially Mitterrand in France, nationally, and many mayors, stressing these themes like decentralization, transparency, fighting corruption, contracting out of service delivery, and in management, listening less to traditional leaders like higher level government, business, unions, and listening more to active citizens and populist new groups and issues that transcend the old left and the old right. How specifically? These are the main themes throughout the course readings, and I'll give you some now focus more on entrepreneurship of mayors and some specific policies. Just a word about Bogota. Confronted acute and dramatic challenges. I won't try to talk about everything, but just a couple of examples in the context of huge innovation. In the 1990s, transforming the, that is, I read about it, trying to understand LA and what could LA do, and it's not just LA. Some of these are more general, but Bogota. Then I got invited, participated, worked with Mayor Mocas and others in and around Colombia for a number of years. There have been books. Mocas after he was the second term, he taught at Harvard. He was I think at Oxford. Been at a lot of conferences, and so he's talking to others, as did Peñalosa, taught at NYU, travel, etc. So that is, these are big issues for national, for local governments globally, and those two guys solved things which people said were intractable, especially having a city council. You're one mayor, and your whole city council is dominated by the drug industry. What do you do if the whole city council says, drugs matter? We don't care about the mayor. We don't care about the citizens. We care about the drug industry. We want to make money for our guys. We don't know exactly the numbers. I made it a little more strongly stated than, I didn't say everybody was, but there was a strong presence, and the way the votes looked that way. Okay. So how could the mayor in turn appeal and get around his own city council? This is a major source of innovation for mayors, and I've worked through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I worked with mayors in Florida, Illinois, and California, who've got the same problem. That is because they can't get their city council and therefore their own staff to work with them, because the council controls the staff. So I'd call up Waukegan, Illinois, and I'd say, and I'd call up and someone would say, garbage collection. I said, I'm trying to reach the budget department. Oh, we do that too. Okay? So there were 5 or so people who the mayor could work with, he would trust them pretty much, but he then would bring in students from the University of Chicago and other colleges who would work with him because his own city council wouldn't give him a thing. They were trying to kill him. Okay, and that's not, and same thing, Northbrook, Illinois. So we had unusual, innovative mayors there that I worked with a fair amount, and have continued with those 2 mayors for decades since. These transformations suggested that Bogota helped move toward the new political culture, which is a label we developed only after having meetings with our international participants for 10 plus years. And we would argue with each other, people from Latin America, from elsewhere, from Eastern Europe, where some of these same debates were going on. And we try to see how the old rules are disappearing in many places. Nevertheless, every city is unique, yet uniqueness comes generally from combining several multiple more general processes, some of which we can consider. when I say we, largely in conjunction with initially as the urban section of the International Sociological Association, which I founded and I was president for years, am still, meets and talks. And we talked before we had any idea of common views or concerns, but then we talked enough that we created this project called Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation, with the hypothesis that austerity might lead to innovation. We found it was not true. Lots of places had austerity and no innovation. Money did not count that much. Different mayors counted a whole lot more. And so why did you get a different mayor who really wanted to do things differently? That became a new question. We meet regularly with mayors, with public officials, with consultants, and start with a proposition that for every problem there is a solution that is clear, simple, and wrong. This flows from the idea of a system, that if you change one factor, many others will shift. Some clear and anticipated, others darker and hard to forecast. So the scene is a system in that sense, but it's a complicated system in ways that have many ripples and indirect effects. And some things change faster or slower than in the past, making it more tricky. But as I've talked before, one quick way to summarize this is to talk about clientelism, class politics, and then the new political culture as a third new type. Often fighting with explicitly the clientelism of southern Italy, as Banfield wrote about it and then tried to codify. And then the class politics from Marx through Weber, through the socialist and communist parties, the Democratic Party still dealing with in various ways, and then this new political culture having elements that are more complicated. So I'll go through some of these now. I'll introduce 12 points related to the new political culture. The simple general thesis of why care is that the new economy, the new political leadership demands creativity, 1. 2, globalization increases competition among cities, firms, individuals, investors, and so forth. And 3, these changes emerge with and crystallize with a new political culture transforming how the political leaders, the parties, the organized groups work, while empowering citizens especially. Citizens are the biggest single change, and linking them through especially social media. Driving in today, I heard a woman who's done a documentary film on the leading critic of Duterte, who's president of the Philippines, and she said, our problem is the same as yours with Trump and the same with Brexit, and the problem is Silicon Valley, it's the big tech companies, they're causing our problems. You in the US should change those big tech, because they created Facebook. And Facebook is, all the Filipinos have Facebook, and they're undermining our political system. Okay. So people like to say, someone outside is causing our problems everywhere. But if we look more closely, I'm making the point, we do have some overlapping problems, but also some overlapping policy options. And these are not just Trump, they're not just Marx, they're not just one thing. There are many things going on simultaneously. So 12 points. 1, post-industrial society, the new economy relies more on ideas, high-tech, innovation, R&D, design, and creation of new products. Strong consumer responsiveness displaces the past patterns of command and control of managers and capitalists. Capitalism and socialism no longer have meaning the way they did, therefore. Richard Florida's book, Rise of the Creative Class, Jane Jacobs' sense of creativity. These are much more central themes, building on Schumpeter and the artists of the 19th century. Okay, point one. Point two, globalization, competition nationally and internationally has undermined the conception of the city as a growth machine. The business regime of Karl Marx, Floyd Hunter, and Clarence Stone has declined as employees and firms move away from a local focus and increasingly compete nationally and internationally. Changes like the internet facilitating contracting out to distant locations have transformed business and governments. Television and tourism give average folks more of a sense of things elsewhere. And tourism is the first or the third largest industry in the world, depending on how you do the accounting. Point three, local personal ties decline. I stress not just capitalism, finance, and business, but also culture, human rights, lifestyle components of globalization, as you've heard from the first session. All of these are important. Global competition undermines traditional elites. Examples of family capitalists, latifundia, old unions, state bureaucracies, army generals. These traditional leaders are declining, and I see this as evidence of globalization interpenetrating countries and localities. Still, clearly cities differ considerably in their specifics, and the more traditional places like Detroit or Rome contrast with the more post-industrial cities like Palo Alto or Grenoble. Cities and regions may rise as nations decline, as in Europe. Okay, point four. Individual citizens rise in importance. Traditional hierarchy declines. Decentralization of authority. Active use of citizens' advisory boards. Surveys of citizens, and the like. Bogota formally decentralized many functions in the early 90s under Mayor Jamie Castro. More media were visible when Bogota Mayor Mocus dressed like Superman the Citizen in a spandex outfit. That got him on media everywhere. This sent a powerful message about, and it said, citizen power. His image was empower the citizen. I'm the Superman empowering the citizen. Corny? Of course. But it worked. More prosaically, Mayor Koch in New York used to walk through the New York subways and ask writers, how am I doing? Okay, Mocus did the same, but he did surveys all the time to try to see, were they building legitimacy? And they did. We used a survey item in our FOWI surveys asking mayors and council members, quote, how often do you vote against the majority of your constituents? Those who did were more likely to be voted out of office or go to jail, most dramatically in Eastern Europe or Italy in the late 80s and 90s, with corruption and other things. And we measure the importance of leadership patterns with standard items in our FOWI surveys, for instance. I'll skip that. Let's take a look at this. Should I just try to click on the Bogota? Traffic. How do you fight traffic jams? You bring in new things.
Creo que la disposición a corregir ese software
es
Mocus. O sea, lo mismo solo no basta. Ahora necesitamos que la gente acepte el ritmo.
Okay, we can't find a longer video which had some terrific terrific interviews with his top staff and other people around him who had, I'll just add one point, an interview with his woman chief of staff who said, I had a first meeting with the police chief, and I said, you know, your traffic police especially are corrupt. They're taking bribes. They're not doing their jobs. What can we do to get rid of this corruption in the police department? And then she said, and I looked him in the eye and I said, what can we do? And he would not look me in the eye. Then I met him a second time. He could not talk to me openly. So we fired 2,300 traffic police. Took the money and we rehired some people who had been in jail, prostitutes, young people who needed work, unemployed, and they became mimes. And they then looked as if they were sweeping the streets, and they had white faces, and everybody in the traffic would say, what is going on? This is Bogota? They're stopping traffic? There are no policemen anymore. And if you get rid of the 2,000 police, will that make traffic better? The fatalities from automobile accidents went way down. It worked. Just one more example. They had a drought, not enough water in the reservoir, and water consumption had been going up. Mocus went on television. That is, he didn't create a civic group. He didn't go to civic organizations. He went on television, and they showed him in his own bathroom, and he said, I love my shower. And I step in, and I turn on the water, and then I turn it right off. Then I soap up, and I sing, because I love to sing in the shower. And I sing as long as I want, because it's my shower. And then when I've had enough, I turn the water right on, and I turn it right off. Water consumption went down by 40% in 2 months. They solved the problem. Tell that to the environmental groups around the world. Okay? You don't need a group, you need something charismatic, maybe a little bit artistic, maybe a little corny, a little irony. The one more example I don't know a lot about, maybe someone else does and could do a paper on this, but when ISIS was most successful in the Middle East and posed a serious threat inside Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, other countries, what did those national governments do to try to fight ISIS? One of the main things they did was fund humorous, ironic videos that would make fun of ISIS. Art, culture is politically powerful if you package it in the right way. The first speaker in Cairo, just before the collapse, maybe after the collapse of the strongmen withdrew, the first speaker in Cairo was a poet, not an organizer, not a policeman, a poet. Many of the NPR interviews of people in the Middle East, especially Iran and Iraq, are film directors, people making videos about, because there are lots of people, expatriates, and who are covering, and who are building songs, videos about, and some of them attacking with humor. Okay. In a sense, it's humor, it's ironic, it's silly stuff, but it gets your attention. Americans, I would say, resonate less traditionally to the arts, but they're learning in the last 20, 30 years. We used to say this is not a cafe society, we don't sit in cafes, we don't waste our time on things like art. Chicago Public Schools crossed out the arts. They stopped funding arts courses in many of the schools about 20, 30 years ago. You know, that's fluff. What we need are, you know, sports and science and history. Sports we need, not art. Okay. Okay, that's gradually changing. One more just quick label like this. How about the term neoliberalism, which people often use, especially in Latin America and Eastern Europe? Many past commentators talk about dependency, neocolonialism, and neoliberal fiscal policies. And some of them blame the University of Chicago. The term neoliberal may be appropriate in places like Chile where for economic and fiscal policies, but for political, more general leadership and policies, it's much too narrow a label, and it implicitly assumes that if you make economic policy, that will cause changes in the political system and the culture and how people live and act. And I wouldn't say they're unrelated, but it's not enough. The economy is not enough. And this is especially shown by these two mayors of Bogota. And as well as more generally the third way, with Clinton, with Tony Blair, with Francois Mitterrand. They revolutionized, and there's a paper by Lipset on about 30 socialist parties around the country, or sorry, around the world. They revolutionized the left to incorporate new issues like the environment, human rights, women's and lifestyle kinds of issues, not just jobs. Not just the patriarchy. Okay, so point 5, political leaders can make a difference. Key individuals crystallize these changes, such as the ones I mentioned, who are similarly responsive to citizens building creative coalitions among multiple sorts of groups. Multiple sorts of groups. That's the trick. So people say, Trump is contradicting himself in these tweets. Darn right, he clearly is. He's not following a party. He doesn't have a party program. He's got his tweets. So he changes his mind all the time. But Trump is not alone. There are multiple people doing the same kind of thing. And, and in that sense, there are internal domestic subgroups, scenes, cleavages, and paying attention to how these work within their own terms is what we need to do more of. Issue-specific politics is a label from political science for this, and it replaces party programs, such that people who favor growth control may or may not be feminists, or may not favor anti-immigration or bicycle paths. The correlations among these different issues are weak or zero, or maybe negative, but weakly negative. Traditional organized groups decline compared to the past. But new ones emerge, like websites, email, listservers, Facebook, Instagram, that Putnam discounted or avoided. Fragmented issues destroy coherent party programs and traditional left-right ideological classification. Point 6. Point 7, cosmopolitan and irony arise as status sets expand. A status set is not just one status like father, mother, daughter. A status set is something that one person can belong to, and you can be a baseball fan, a vegan, a bicycle rider, and a geek. You can be a woman or a man. You can be young or old. That is, these different status combinations make life more complicated. They imply overlapping social roles among concrete individuals. So as more women became mothers and workers and church organizers and political party workers, then civic leaders differed in these many different civic groups. As these status sets multiply in scope and number and complexity, it's harder to classify a single citizen. It's harder to vote or act politically based just on one status like proletarian. Multiple statuses compete for attention, which moderates the radical mobilization around just one theme or group. It enhances social liberalism and tolerance for new social roles. And the same processes go further with globalization, when ethnicity can be redefined by new views about the country of origin. Italian Americans are proud when other Americans visit Italy and marvel at the Roman ruins. When they eat in a great Italian restaurant, you have terrific ice cream and so forth. And design. The Italians have been global leaders at design way ahead of the Northern Europeans. And so those aspects of design have then been taken over by little companies like Apple, and Apple has then become the #1 U.S. corporation in size, not based on smarter engineering, but what really made the difference, Samsung did the same, was design. That's it. Now, I'm not saying it's one factor, but that factor added with excellent engineering, terrific service, good production, etc. Korean Americans are proud to see African Americans and Caucasians engage in Korean martial arts. These cumulatively can redefine the meaning of citizenship as more cosmopolitan conceptions of status as the individual conception links with the scene, where each of these statuses may be part of 4 different scenes. So one person can be part of 4 scenes at maybe different times a day, maybe not exactly simultaneously, but they affect how the person thinks and votes and talks and talks on the web. The narrower and simpler ethnic and single identity politics of the past, from the 70s, the identity politics of women, gays, LGBTQ, human rights, the environment, they acted more like traditional parties. They had membership cards. They had organizational structures. They had websites. They collected dues. They tried to organize rallies by the organization. We've introduced a new concept that is this, and so then I started inviting people doing some of this, and I said, then we had the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement does not fit. You had all these organizations. You had people there because they've got new outfits and they're taking pictures of each other. They're there because they want to go and see the party. They want to dance. It's exciting. The media are there. So the serious USC Hyde Park students went down to Occupy in the middle of Chicago and said, we don't want to be part of this. These people they're not following a program that we have laid out, whether we're environmentalists or this or this or this. And they said, Occupy it's not real. It's not real politics. Okay. So things change faster. And so one label we have for this is the new civic groups, the new social media, it's a crude way of just using new twice, but this came in, this extended the new political culture propositions in the middle of this book, but they went so much faster and further than I had imagined that this, and so the Occupy movement is an extension of all of that, but it just came in with a huge splash. When people see in their jobs, what they see in their jobs, they also want from their governments. They want citizen responsiveness, courtesy, efficiency, computerization. This encourages competition via decentralization of government programs from the national governments, the renaissance of the local, contracting out to multiple service providers, including international contracting, more emulation of foreign examples. Chicago has learned a lot, especially from Paris. Mayor Daley, too, went to Paris, he was amazed at seeing the bus stops. So he got a French company, and all the bus stops in Chicago are built and maintained by a French company. Drives around and puts ads on them, cleans them up, fixes the glass if they're broken. But they're just as pretty as they are in Paris. Okay. The combination of social liberalism with fiscal caution was seen initially as an impossible mix, mere hypocrisy. This changed with more and such leaders of the NPC as Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Vicente Fox in Mexico, and others who visibly sought to implement these joint policies and brought new labels like the Third Way. They were led to productivity. So how can you combine these two things? How can you spend, how can you not increase the budget but do new things? The main answer is improve government productivity. Improve productivity. The normal view is that productivity is only hypocrisy. It cannot be done. You either have to grow the government in taxes or you need to cut. And those are the two positions of the traditional left and the traditional right. So clearly you don't want to see, if you're a traditional left party program writer, you don't want to see that your basic core, your program is wrong. You want to say the new people are hypocrites. They don't understand real politics. And I was in Italy, and I was teaching at the University of Florence when a professor of physics was elected mayor of Florence. And I talked to every smart faculty member in political science and sociology. I said, what do you think of this new mayor? Oh, he doesn't understand anything. He's just a physicist. A dumbo. Okay? He was holding global conferences on the environment, bringing in experts from Scandinavia, Latin America, etc. But he'd never been to a political party's training school where they teach you how to be clientelists, okay? And to write a program. So we wrote to the mayors of the top 10 or 15 cities in Italy. They all said, please send your programs, some of your speeches, and about half of them were doing things in the direction of Florence. Okay. So searching, if you begin to, at least you try, if you try to improve productivity, that's half that's the hardest part. Most mayors, most people don't try to change, and that's normal. But some do, and they can be sources of leadership and innovation for the rest, inspiration. The political driver, the idea of reinventing government movement, the force for continuous innovation through political challengers. Yeah, then through the political process, if the incumbent can be shown to fail, then you say, I want to be the new mayor, I want to be a new council member, and here's how I'll do it better. And that led to the physicist mayor of Florence, or Lori Lightfoot, mayor of Chicago. Her main theme was, I'm against the past people. All these people are corrupt and inefficient, they're doing it the old way. I'm going to do it a new way. And people, she had no background, no expertise, no organization, and she's now mayor of Chicago. So this is happening in many, many places. Number 8, internationally, citizens in Europe, the US, and Japan are broadly similar in supporting these general issues of social tolerance and fiscal caution, but the organized groups differ. Especially in Japan, the groups are weaker, and in the US, they're much stronger. This result comes from surveys of citizens using the best international comparative data, like the World Values Survey from Ronald Inglehart and the NORC GSS ISSP. Social capital, so-called, can come from multiple sources, not just organized groups, as we're seeing in the course. Point 9, parties still dominate in Western Europe, but even there, parties are declining and shifting their programs to try to catch up to citizens. Almost no parties in the US no parties outside the U.S. have primary elections, with Mexico as the main exception. Mexico and Taiwan are the main exception. So party leaders, not the citizens, battle over slating and campaign finance decisions. Thus, Mitterrand, Blair, and Schroeder had huge battles within their parties, but they gradually transformed their socialist parties toward these NPC issues. So did Bill Clinton in the U.S. These national leaders came a decade or more after the citizens had changed. The citizen survey showed us this, for whom the 1960s student disturbances, more college education, married women joining the labor force, new social movements were critical. Citizens and innovative leaders react to the classic hierarchical parties by labeling themselves independent, or starting new parties or seeking to transform the older parties from within. These new roles were clearly implemented years earlier by innovative mayors like Dianne Feinstein in San Francisco, Kathy Whitmire in Houston, and hundreds of others in smaller locations. They stressed social issues like abortion, women's rights, the environment, fighting corruption, inefficient government. Many were women. International comparisons of the factors driving these changes across over 10,000 cities in 20-plus countries, which we did in the book, show that the political parties were particularly critical in slowing other processes. That is, countries with strong parties slowed down these kinds of changes. The stronger parties retarded the emergence of this NPC as the party leaders chose only candidates for office who followed traditional party lines. They basically would not slate. That is, if you didn't follow the party line, you'd have, in England it's called a party whip. So there's a representative, the Conservative and the Labour Party, and if you had someone who wanted to run for city council, you'd go to the party whip and say, will you back me and will you slate me for city council here in Birmingham, whatever. So, well, will you follow the first question? Will you follow us, the party program, and me as the leader? And if the person said, well, I'll do my best, I say, sorry. And so we would meet with many city council members in France and Germany and England who would tell us this. Okay, nevertheless, it didn't always work. And so you had in France, after Mitterrand was elected, he took power with the communists. They had a coalition, the socialists and communists in France from 19... I won't give you date. I'm not sure the date. But roughly after 2 years, they had local elections. And the local elections brought in some really big, some major potential changes in the biggest cities of France, Lyon and Grenoble, especially those two. Bordeaux, less so. Those mayors of those secondary cities in France started fighting their own parties, and they made a huge impact with media showing new policies, but after about 5 to 10 years, the parties killed them off. So the parties are still so strong in France that the parties beat them. In Italy, the corruption got so bad that there were young judges. Judges are sort of staff, and judges is not the right term, sort of the staffs around the judges in the legal departments of France and Italy began to assemble more and more data on corruption, and they basically drove into retirement a number of the mayors. And in Italy, basically, they destroyed the major parties of the whole post-war system. Communist, socialist, Christian Democrat parties were all basically destroyed. You now have 30 parties in Italy actively seeking votes, but the old leaders of the strong parties are either in jail or they're out of politics. Point 10, consumption replaces production politics. We can join several of these points by labeling them consumption politics, lifestyle rises, jobs decline, and relative emphasis by political leaders in campaign speeches and party programs. This trend we found in 250 national parties in 28 countries from 1945 to 1988 in the book. Consumption and amenities rise in driving policy, which we can see by analyzing where talented citizens move, since they change where they live, and they have more choices as they have fewer connections to local patterns. And we showed that the theory of amenities, and I put a slide up, I think, showing that a session or two back. The amenities attract the human capital, which in turn uses the physical capital, the money, the corporations, the city governments, more efficiently. And amenities, both natural, hills and water, and constructed amenities, opera, bookstores, cafes, are important in explaining where people move, controlling for other standard kinds of measures. 11. Just as Chicago resisted the new political culture, resistance sparks diverse cultural styles. Many countries globally are involved in the same way. So in a book I worked on with Daniel Elazar, we stressed the distinctiveness of the Northwest European Protestants and Jews in leading global change in values, bringing reform to locations as diverse as Taiwan, Japan, Argentina, and Russia. There's great resistance in some locations, leading to many transformations of Western patterns. Key or indigenous leaders like Gandhi or Mao who create a new cultural synthesis. But changes are spreading rapidly via NGOs, the World Bank, media, and international education. The huge rise in evangelical Protestantism across Latin America has attracted much attention in this regard. My point is that these changes are interrelated and feed into the political processes. These range from product boycotts to guerrilla warfare. Cumulatively, they transform our political cultures and the specific roles of the game of which politics is played, from Bogota to Calcutta. And consciously adding big point, morality, consciously adding morality and politics together is a major innovation. Most Southern Europeans and Latin Americans were openly cynical about politics a generation ago. This has changed dramatically in the political discourse as greater populism and a broader and deeper conception of citizenship have spread. The media can play a critical role, and the social media more. New movements like Etzioni's communitarianism seek to join the best of collectivism and individualism. Okay, last point, 12. What drives these political culture changes? Space prohibits elaboration, but in the book, chapters 2 and chapter 2, we have 3 general principles and some 20 specific propositions. 3 principles include, first of all, something I've talked about in general terms, the leveling principle. Hierarchies generate reactions against hierarchy. Think of Paris in '68 or Tiananmen Square as essentially protests against hierarchy. Think of Ivan the Terrible reacting against the residues of Genghis Khan within Russia. So the center of the film that Stalin made during World War II to mobilize the troops that you got to fight those Germans was Ivan the Terrible creating the Russian state. He's the first Tsar, and together they would beat back the residues of Oriental Genghis Khan. So there's an attack on the lead. The third city in Russia was Kazan. The siege of Kazan was the center of Ivan the Terrible. Okay, so basically, at that point, you don't say we're going to have an environmental organization. We're going to have a dog. But in Beijing today, I've had people who say, we have this in Beijing too. We have, some of the most important things are people have their animals like their dogs. Where can they take their dogs if there aren't any parks? Is that left? Is that right? Is that socialism? Okay. So the leveling principle, so that to articulate more, the most current, so the first leveling principle says if you have hierarchy, your first program is down the hierarchy. You attack the hierarchy, nothing more. That's all. That's all they talk about in Columbia. It's the guerrillas versus the center. But after you've won and the old hierarchy has been toppled, after the revolution in Paris in '68, after de Gaulle resigns, after Ronald Reagan is no longer president, people, or after Tiananmen Square, the most critical current corollary is the opposite. As hierarchy declines, so do movements whose main goal is anti-hierarchy. Globalization goes hand in hand with weakening of the traditional national bureaucracies and the legitimacy of clientelist hierarchies. As these hierarchies decline, so do movements to destroy them. Thus, if de Gaulle is no longer in power or the communist leadership grows more responsive to democratic initiatives, first in Spain and Italy, later in Eastern Europe, then in China, then it's harder and harder to organize a movement whose main focus is attacking the hierarchy. Instead, the NPC emerges with more issue specificity, lots of little tweaks. Second, the empowerment principle. As individuals acquire more organizational and communication skills, education, income, professional jobs, television, travel, internet, they participate more in civic and political groups and rely less on parties or clientelist padrone. Third are structural conditions such as a multi-party system or federalism that can encourage more decentralization in these tendencies. These three ideas, hierarchy, empowerment, and structural arrangements, are elaborated and tested in the 20 propositions in this book. They're tested in 6 different books using different levels and types of data and methods on citizens, on mayors, on cities, on nations, on quantitative, ethnographic, oral history of Chicago, etc. So the core ideas and findings are briefly outlined in 3 graphics, which are in the book here. Basically, these NPC patterns start first in places like college towns and high-tech areas that have more of this NPC driving properties, education, professional jobs. But over time, even traditional locations like, believe it or not, Chicago, with the last election being the most dramatic visible illustration. The changing colors and rules of our city's mayors have been too dramatic to resist documenting, so I did a book on Chicago from Daily One to Daily 2, continuing on, called Trees and Real Violins, Building Post-Industrial Chicago. And we'll talk about it on Wednesday a little bit. It charts the rise of consumption politics and amenities as a means to enhance political reform, to break away from patronage and stress public goods like better schools and safer streets for all citizens, not just the politically connected. There's a related rise of independent groups. It's the more general importance of how these NPC trains operate, even for poor, less educated Catholic and non-Catholic groups whose traditions firmly oppose the NPC originally. Okay, so I'm trying to see what time is it? Is that 5:30? 5:30. Okay, let me talk just on one more point, and then we'll have discuss. Think of comments and questions, and I'll just add. What policies does the NPC encourage? Clientelists favor payoffs for their specific constituents. Class politics favors a more active government. Class politics of the right prefers cutting taxes and spending. The NPC leaders break with these ideologies of clientelism and class politics as they seek policies incorporating at least some of the above 12 points that I covered. two major shifts incorporate several others. First is consciously adding morality to public policy, to label lawbreakers as morally bad, while contributing to the Commonwealth is ennobled. In Bogota, they had a situation where if you liked the government, you could pay your you could pay 110% of your taxes. And there were thousands and thousands of people who did that, who showed they supported the mayor by increasing voluntarily the amount of tax they would pay, which is the opposite of what Samuelson and the narrow conception of public choice economics said. They said it's impossible. No rational person would do that. Okay, in Bogota they did. Second, and related to adding morality, is defining a public good or commonwealth as a shared resource that must be cultivated by all and which can be appreciated and used. This directly counters the me first, the amoral familism, the amoral cynicism, individualism, which has classically been common in many parts of the world, including political science with some of the public choice tradition. James Buchanan and Olson were blamed for some of this. Buchanan, Tulloch, Olson, and the like. They didn't, but you don't have to. You can use public choice ideas as Gary Becker did, and many of his students have here in economics, and you can find all kinds of public good kinds of things which are similarly, quote, rational. NBC leaders could seek to promote public goods by introducing new kinds of issues that appeal to the general citizenry, or at least to seek to promote them this way, such as clean air, or an efficient bus system, or public spaces. Peñalosa really, Peñalosa and the mayor of Naples, Borsellino, both tried to show visibly that they were fighting the gangs, so that is the mafia, in their cities, which had taken over and sold the spaces for selling cigarettes or liquor or clothes or scarves or whatever in the big public spaces. They were having trucks and things which were selling this, and there was no place to park, and they were no longer public parking spaces or other such issues. And so both in Bogota and in Naples, the mayor said, this is a public space, you guys get out of here. So the mafia said, you know, we're going to assassinate you. The revolutionary gangs across Colombia, when there was a set of reform mayors that started to run along with Mocus, FANAC sent them all letters and said, we're going to kill you and your whole family if you run. Don't run for mayor. They still ran, and then something, and so I think, I can't remember the numbers, but at least 20 of them were murdered. So it's dangerous, but innovation has occurred. When I went there, Bogota had 6 times the U.S. murder rate. And I had to sign a death and dismemberment contract before they would walk me through the airport to get to a cab to the city hall. Okay, etc. But the point is that changed. The crime rates went way down. Traffic problems went down. Consumption of water went down. Okay, and these were semi-public goods recognized by lots of people. Bogota included some civic activities, as Tocqueville wrote about, but they were not the core. This is where here I disagree with the New England tradition. I would say the core was such things, and here I'll just put this in a word or two, and we'll elaborate a little more as we go on, but keep it in mind, using the arts. The mimes were artistic. You're bringing the arts to traffic? How can you do that? These are incompatible domains. We don't need the arts. We need a traffic policeman. No, the arts the mimes did a better job. Okay, so Mocus did this regularly. He would bring in the emotion. What does the arts bring? A sense of creativity. The mayor has the the chutzpah to do something, to fire all the traffic police, to rehire some of them for about 1/3 the wage they were getting before, and strictly controlling that they wouldn't take bribes. Combined with a sense that the emotional, that is, why are the arts now being used more generally? Italian cities are using the arts to mobilize many groups, to articulate different perspectives. Why? In part because clientelism has become labeled illegitimate. When the Chinese inspector of dog food approved a huge, a ship full of dog food and went to the US and it killed hundreds or thousands of American dogs, the inspector got a bribe because the guy who made the dog food knew it was bad, but he wanted it, we'll export it. Who cares if the American dogs die? Okay, the inspector, what happened? What did the Chinese national leadership do to the inspector? He was hung. Okay, the Chinese national government is actively, visibly, officially fighting corruption. Now, is it authentic? Is it going down? Is it meeting everything? No. So, Alan is working on a possible PhD ideas of where and how does this work in more subtle ways, but it's tricky stuff, and publicly, at least, the national government is doing it. The national government, in terms of dramatic change in policy, said, okay, looking at what was happening around the world, but going further, Proposition 13, Reagan, and all this kind of thing. The national government said, we're going to decentralize, we'll give more money to the provinces and the cities and so forth, and then we will also fire 1/3 of all national government workers, staff. And they did. 1/3 of the national government staff were fired. Not immediately, they get to fold it in over 5 years or something like that. 2 or 3 years after that, they said, okay, same thing for the provincial and local governments in China. 1/3 of you are going to be fired. What happened? Nothing. The national government and the CCCP cannot control the local areas the way the New York Times suggests it does. China's complicated. But the point is, there's still lots of local clientelism in China. There's lots of local clientelism in Italy and Eastern Europe and Russia and Africa and Latin America and so forth. That is, these political views of what the rules are, whether it's clientelism or class politics or NPC, they're fighting it out right now all around the world. And when you add issue specificity, it gets more messy still. But the idea of the populism, which I'm stressing here, which goes back 20 years with these names, Dianne Feinstein, Bill Clinton, and so forth. The term is now being used publicly and visibly to talk about these new populists, which came in especially in 2016 with Trump, Brexit, Duterte in the Philippines, East Europeans, and so forth. But elements of this populism, especially the issue specificity, is shared between these, and the issue specificity using the media, especially social media, not just big party organizations and party programs. Those revolutions started in the 1970s and 80s. Okay. New production cleavages include women, jazz fans, and bicyclists, etc., rather than union members or capitalists. Okay, then I mentioned the this political culture sea change is the foundation of which specific policies can build, since once new leaders start to look, they can find all manner of ways to cut costs and improve services, even if the classic left and right parties and commentators deny that productivity improvement is possible. Let me stop there. I've got more I can draw in if you want on Bogota, Naples, Chicago, Oh, no, let me just put one word here which we'll elaborate Wednesday, but I'll just mention it here. Another class of policies is completely new to Chicago, promoting culture, high and low and diverse. Artists, musicians, poets, and dancers have been feted with all manner of new programs. Chicago Fest started as a small set of public concerts. It has grown into continual music, dance, culinary, and theatrical entertainment nearly every night of the summer months. Fireworks twice weekly. Most of all, it is free or very low cost. The city pays for the best national groups to perform for the general public or subsidizes them heavily. Free admission or low cost for some others. Poetry is now common in poetry jams, contests where a dozen or so poets can each read their work and compete for applause and enthusiasm from the audience. Poets often combine humor, personal anecdotes, and unusual dress with their poetry. Some 30 of these are held monthly in bars and cafes across the city. When we first started noticing these, I think it's probably gone up. Many of these mixed cultures, such as rap and Elizabethan themes, they violate neighborhood traditions. They create new cosmopolitan combinations. Black, Hispanic, and Asian poets. Some 140 theaters are active with new plays and staging techniques. Perhaps most unusual is that the city government has started adding culture at one point. Daily 2 required every city agency to do some culture. But I'll talk about that more on Wednesday when we apply this to Chicago. My point is, these things are happening from Brazil to Eastern Europe to China to Chicago. Discussion. Number of challenges I put out. Not everybody agrees with me at this university or elsewhere, as you can imagine. We've had lots of discussions. But you are the future. Okay, here we go.
The concept of new global culture is very fascinating, and I think just sort of bringing in China a little bit. In China, like thinking about politics or discussing political culture, I guess is not as relevant to people's everyday lives because of the political structure and all. But then I definitely feel the resonance that this issue specificity is kicking in because China's undergone huge economic and social transformations, and people have diverse interests in a lot of social issues. And I think the government has sort of spontaneously been doing sort of using social media, using various sorts of ways that people find more accessible instead of just say posting an announcement on the government website. They have police stations have Weibo accounts, something like Twitter accounts, and they tweet about stuff in a very friendly way that is accessible to the public.
Public good.
Yes, and then a personal example for me, because I am a video gamer, so I'm interested in esports, and then a lot of gamers are very shocked when the government, well, it's technically not the government, it's the national television, it's the CCTV, the Central National Television, when it openly acknowledged these Chinese teams that competed for first place in the World Series for a video game. And that sounds very niche to most people. It would be unimaginable 10 years ago, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to engage these people, and then people feel, oh, the government is literally legitimizing our game, and we feel that we're closer to the government. And in a way that I see this sort of maybe not bottom up, but top down in a way that the government is adapting to these new ways of politics.
So cultural policy.
Yes, cultural policy. But yeah, some thoughts are out there.
Okay, these are excellent examples and points, so thank you. Anybody else want to comment, challenge, question? Okay, we got these.
Oh, no. She's got this.
All right.
I just have a quick question. So
Our
how do we,
Egyptian perspective?
No, just
More general.
a human perspective.
Okay, human, there we go.
I'm just curious, like, how would you explain the rise of somebody like Sanders and the galvanizing impact he had in American politics through the Slims, or in relation to the Slims?
Yeah. My simple answer is that he and the tradition, or both he and Trump, in this sense, are reactions against the success of the NPC. That is, the NPC emerged fighting class politics and clientelism, and a lot of people were elected, like Bill Clinton, Tony Blair. And so Trump actively campaigned against Hillary Clinton, saying things that her husband had made mistakes. I mean, he created NAFTA. I will destroy NAFTA. And so Trump had a long list of specific things, many, and then elements. So Trump was attacking both the classic left as well as the NPC. And most of all, tolerance. So tolerance is generally seen in international tolerance, people in different national background, ethnicity, race, etc. It's generally seen as going, tolerance is generally seen as increasing with the new political culture. So by Trump and some others, by attacking and reversing that, Sanders, I would say similarly, as mayor of Burlington, Vermont, he was doing the kind, I mean, he basically is a more, his basic instincts are old socialism. In a sense, he's the old left, but he tries to add new style to it. But that's a way of attacking the NPC. Another example, which is more general, for instance, in Eastern Europe, when after 1989, I mean, the Russians said, you can have anybody you want. I mean, they don't have to be communists. So the communists lost all the elections. In the first election, 2 years, 3 years later, they had new elections. And I think it was in Hungary and in most of the East European countries, Communist Party gained more votes legitimately, without the Russians in the background. There were many people who were fighting against this Western liberalism stuff, and we want someone to tell us what to do. I work with many Poles who go and they go down. They have local meetings all over Poland. There was a British organization that had meetings that said, we're now going to have a free election here in this small town, and you can, here's how you get to the ballot booth, here's the way here's how you can vote, and so forth. And then question at the end, who's going to come from Warsaw and tell us how to do it, how to vote? I mean, the sense of change that is point one. Point two, egalitarianism. An aspect very powerful in China with socialism, with Marx, is equality. So that has been picked up as, so if you can label that anti-capitalist, we want more equality and we want the government to do it, that as well is a theme. So that's superficial, but at least it's, and there are maybe 5 or so propositions here elaborating exactly these points. But I would say this is still new and changing enough that even if I've said this, and this is true in general, when you get to one specific candidate or person, each person is unique. So I would still look for the way they particularly combine it. Yeah.
So I agree with like the kind of like establishment of this foundation when it introduces. But what I think is interesting, like looking at the U.S. context specifically, my question is, how can we differentiate between the morality that the new political culture introduces and the morality that like the new political right, which had its foundation on evangelical fundamentalism in the 1980s, came about with that same rhetoric of encroachment of values?
No, but I would say both of those examples illustrate my point. that we now have much more morality in politics than we did 34 years ago. When I was in France, when people would talk about human rights, which Jimmy Carter, as president, was featuring internationally. Jimmy Carter was the first national figure who tried to take human rights to an international audience. And the French media, the French political leaders just laughed. So this is a country bumpkin American, you know, he's a peanut farmer. What does he know about real politics? The man we want is Kissinger. Kissinger and Nixon. That's real politics. So in that sense, so that the French, so all the Southern Europeans basically said the same thing. I mean, like I told you, my Florence, Italy, he's smart, sociologist, political science. You know, he's just a physicist. He doesn't know how to do politics. That is, over time, say maybe 4 or 5 years after that, I looked at an Italian television program, and they had they basically had some of the top political Italian leaders following a moralistic, egalitarian kind of perspective. Instead of saying, you know, the party says do this, do that. You know, we will, you know, we'll do it our way. These top, I think there was the president of the European Union, the president of the prime minister of Italy, and the mayor of Rome, something like that. We're talking about one school in Yugoslavia. I forgot what the details were. So they had on the same television program. It was about 2 hours. It wasn't, you know, this 30 seconds the way we get in the U.S. It was a 2-hour discussion among all these people, including one classroom in Yugoslavia, a soccer team in Rome, where there was it was sort of relations with Bosnia. That is, how can Italy and Bosnia work together or not? And there were Bosnian soccer players on the Rome soccer team, and they said, and so the team members said, you know, if we lose so and so, you know, we're going to be a much weaker soccer team. We need to have this Bosnian playing on our team, etc. And so then you had these 3 top political leaders listening to the students in the Yugoslav classroom posing questions to them on Italian national television. And that would have been unheard of 5 years before. So there's a sense of participatory egalitarianism, listening to other people in ways that is and behind this is a sense that the citizen is the legitimate source of power. And if you try to act powerfully and you don't have the legitimacy of the citizen, and what gives you legitimacy? It's values and a sense of shared, that the leaders and the citizens together share that they're doing the right thing. And if they don't share that, and whose values are they? The citizens. So the citizen values, citizens in a sense have probably more simple, clear, explicit senses of morality. You shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't this and that. But smart political leaders, you know, have complicated senses. Oh, this and that, and so forth. But the idea of having a simple, citizen-responsive morality, I would say, has swept across Mediterranean Southern Europe in ways that went much faster than other people.
But I would say, like, that's if it, you know, like, again, like, going back to the U.S. context, you know, if sort of this idealized, like, egalitarian version, whereas, like, you know, what the fundamentalist evangelical group, the pertinence of that example is to say that they want private values to become public morale. So how do you reconcile?
Well, you know, when you say private values, what's an example?
You know, when they're talking about, like, LGBTQ rights and they don't agree with that, or, you know, it's like, the family, you know, is being threatened, or, you know, drug use. kind of that, or like taking out, you know, religion from school. That was a big topic in the 80s. And, you know, it's like the private values of this organization, you know, this collective group is not necessarily the.
Well, and I guess I'd be cautious about saying one is private and the other is public. I mean, they're different conceptions of morality in the sense maybe you're saying they're too simple and I mean, school prayer is not what one kid does alone. The whole class does the school prayer, and probably the whole school. And in the U.S., it's generally determined by a school board of elected officials. So in that sense, okay. We're not going to get to the next question, but you'll have the first comment, question when we start on Wednesday. How's that? And anybody else who had further comments. But we'll continue Wednesday. Read on.